fear-mongering is a derogatory term for a type of behavior exhibited in a lot of political figures online, especially conservatives, where you try to present information in a way that warrants an unnecessary or exaggerated fear response from your audience. So if I were to say, for example, um, Antifa wants to come to your house and burn down your house and fuck you and your mom. That would be kind of fear mongering, because Antifa only burns down every other house, and Antifa only fucks um, milfs who are who adopt the aesthetic. It's not just any mom. Moms can look like anything. But a MILF, when we think of a MILF, we think of something like there's a specific kind of archetype, like maybe the hair or the clothing or the dress. And that's what Antifa tends to go for. So if I were to make that claim, it would be an exaggerated one. Here's a claim that I avoided making for a while. Do you remember the Patriot Prayer member who died in Portland after he fucked around and then subsequently found out? Remember? We took a look at some of the footage on stream a few weeks ago. It was the Patriot Prayer guy, and I looked at different camera angles, and I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't actually know if the 100% Antifa guy was acting in legitimate self-defense. I genuinely don't know. It looked really ambiguous from the clips that I saw, and I respect the ambiguity of legitimate self-defense claims. Sometimes it's really difficult to know when or when not it's warranted. I respect that. But I'm not so interested in the act itself as in what happened afterwards. Because you guys may remember, Michael Reinl was gunned down shortly thereafter by agents of the state. And what I wanted to do was say, this was an extrajudicial killing, this was a lynching, this was a hit put out by the government because he killed a member of Patriot Prayer, a far-right group, and the government backs the far right. But I didn't want to be hyperbolic. The reason for that is because I'm not a fucking dumbass. There are a lot of conservatives online right now, people like Ian Miles Chong, Paul Joseph Watson, Tim Pool, who will just put out any old info the nanosecond it crosses their feed with the greatest possible hyperbole on what has happened most recently. A street altercation turns into one guy jumped another, turns into Antifa jumped a conservative, turns into it's like these constant cycling. Everybody plays telephone with the info. I try to be responsible for the most part, and I waited. And I've waited enough. New accounts from the scene raise questions about whether Michael Reinl, suspected of killing a far-right Trump supporter, pulled out a gun before officers fatally shot him. You see, the narrative was that Michael Reinl, who of course owns guns, drew on the officers who showed up outside his place, and thus the officers were warranted in gunning him down. And while I am not generally a fan of police or any agents of the state, I will admit that if you draw on police officers, the police officer is probably going to shoot you. That seems to be how it goes, generally speaking. But I'm not so sure about that anymore. Let me dazzle you with a few excerpts of this article. Michael Reinl was on the run. A few days after a shooting left a far-right Trump supporter dead in the streets of Portland, Oregon, Mr. Reinl, an Antifa activist who had been named in the news media as a focus in the investigation, feared vigilantes were after him, not to mention the police. Even some of his close friends did not know where he was. But the authorities knew. On September 3rd, about 120 miles north of Portland, Mr. Reinl was getting into his Volkswagen station wagon when a pair of unmarked sports utility vehicles roared through the quiet streets, screeching to a halt just in front of his bumper. Members of a U.S. Marshals task force jumped out and unleashed a hail of bullets that shattered windows, whizzed by bystanders, and left Reinl dead in the street. Attorney General Barr trumpeted the operation as a significant accomplishment that removed a violent agitator. The officers had opened fire, he said, when Mr. Reinl attempted to escape arrest and produced a firearm during the encounter. But a reconstruction of what happened that night, based on the accounts of people who witnessed the confrontation and the preliminary findings of investigations, produces a much different picture. One that raises questions about whether law enforcement officers made any serious attempt to arrest Mr. Reinl before killing him. In interviews with 22 people who were near the scene, all but one said they did not hear officers identify themselves or give any commands before open firing. Remember that from any other cases we've looked over lately? In their official statements not yet made public, the officers offered differing accounts of whether they saw Mr. Reinl with a weapon. One told investigators he thought he saw Reinl raise a gun inside the vehicle before the firing began. The other two did not. Just a quick reminder, this is how you treat criminals, by the way. You separate them into different rooms, and you start asking them questions to make sure their stories align. We're treating officers that way. And to be honest, given the way they've been behaving under this administration, I think I would trust the criminals to deliver that information faithfully more. Mr. Reinl did have a .380 caliber handgun on him when he was killed, according to the county sheriff's team that is running a criminal homicide investigation until Reinl's death, but the weapon was found in his pocket. Maybe he drew the handgun and then was gunned down by 2 cars full of cops, and then in a spastic muscular spasm as he died, he reinserted the gun back into his pocket politely, and then fell onto the ground. And obviously, he did so with such force that in inserting it back into his pocket, he wiped the gunpowder residue on the barrel of the gun, on the inside of the pocket again. So it was like it had never been drawn. I mean, that can happen. That can happen. That's not impossible. It's totally possible. An AR-style rifle was found apparently untouched in a bag in his car. 5 eyewitnesses said in interviews the gunfire began the instant the vehicles arrived. None of them saw Mr. Reinl holding a weapon. A single shell casing of the same caliber as the handgun he was carrying was found inside the car. Garrett Lewis, who watched the shooting begin while trying to get his 8-year-old son out of the line of fire, cops, by the way, while trying to get his 8-year-old son out of the line of fire, said the officers arrived with such speed and violence that he initially assumed they were drug dealers gunning down a foe, until he saw their law enforcement vests. It goes on for a while. The U.S. Marshal Service declined to comment for this article, citing the pending investigation. The agency previously said that it had attempted to peacefully arrest Mr. Reinl and that he had threatened the lives of the law enforcement officers. President Trump, who has described the racial justice protests that have roiled the nation as the work of lawless criminals, praised the operation. This guy was a violent criminal, and the U.S. Marshals killed him, the president told Fox News. And I will tell you something, that's the way it has to be. There has to be retribution when you have a crime like this. Now, I feel like my stream is becoming less and less a stream about socialism and more a stream about educating people on the very basic foundations on constitutional law. Which is interesting. I'm not a lawyer. However, I'm going to make a statement, maybe any lawyers in chat can disagree if you think I'm wrong. Retribution isn't how our justice system works. That's actually, believe it or not, that's actually not that's not the term we use. The cops are meat wagons we employ to deliver suspects to a trial so they can be tried. Not until a person is convicted is a person innocent. That is what it means to be innocent until proven guilty. That's how the whole system works, actually. I remember this being, I remember all these conservatives who nowadays are, did I misspeak again, as always? I said innocent, not guilty. I said it backwards, did I? Innocent until proven guilty? Isn't that what I just said? You gotta stop interrupting me every time I misspeak, okay? Yeah, innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, Sam Harris, yeah. Hold on. Vosh, retribution is one of the elements/purposes of criminal law, along with deterrence and rehabilitation. No, actually. Retribution is a philosophical principle which we can derive from the function of our law enforcement. That is to say, if you do a bad thing, the deterrent of retribution by way of imprisonment is something you can expect. That does not mean police officers act with the goal of inflicting retribution on people. That is not their job. They bring people to trials. That is their job. Now, the Constitution is not a perfect document, but it does protect us in certain and very important ways, one of which being this one. And I really need you to roll this picture through your mind, if you take a moment. We are now at a point in this country where if you kill a member of a far-right militia, self-defense or not, we don't know because there was never a trial, you will be driven up on by unmarked vans and gunned down in front of your house while civilians sprint to flee the line of fire. And the President of the United States will laud what has taken place as a successful act of retribution. Now, there is still a lot of ambiguity here when it comes to the actual implementation of this marshal's force, of how they handled things, and how culpable varying agents are. At least there was. Here's Donald Trump.
U.S. Marshals. Took 15 minutes, it was over. 15 minutes, it was over. We got him. They knew who he was. They didn't want to arrest him. In 15 minutes, that ended. Anyway, and they called themselves peaceful protest.
They didn't want to arrest him. Holy shit. They didn't want to arrest them. I wasn't aware that's something cops get to choose. They didn't want. Not only did they not make an effort, this was premeditated. This wasn't a cop got fearful. This wasn't a cop maybe saw a glint that they thought was a gun and was actually just a reflective gum wrapper. This was a hit. This was a hit on a political opponent. It could happen to any one of you. You realize that, right? If you are here, if you enjoy my content, you match a political profile that means that if you were to be killed by the state, your death would be celebrated by about half the country. They would go through your Facebook profile pictures, your Discord account. They would find something. They would laugh about it. If you fuck up at a protest, even if you get to survive, even if you legally exercise self-defense against a far-right militia member, it doesn't matter anymore, baby. The state will chase you down. They have your address. They can track your credit card purchases. They have the greatest possible level of judicial and investigative authority imaginable on Earth. It's the state, the United States, and they will fucking kill you. They will roll up on your house like they are a rival gang, and they will perforate the front of your house while civilians flee to get their 8-year-olds out of the line of fire. It is impossible for me to describe the degree to which our society faces oblivion. We face oblivion when the President of the United States is listening to applause as he openly says he put out a hit on an innocent person. And I say innocent here because this motherfucker never had a trial. This guy never got to live to see trial. Now we'll never know. We'll never have exculpatory or evidence being brought to the table. We'll never have a proper investigation. There's no point. Everyone involved is dead. The Patriot Prayer guy is dead. And Reinl was put down in a hit. There's no reason to investigate anymore. So Reinl died innocent. There is currently an investigation into the activities of the marshals who killed him. By the way, if I remember correctly, the marshals who killed him were deputized, which means that it's actually even worse. It was like one marshal, and then he was like, "Yeehaw, boys! Here's your silver badge. Let's go do a lynching." Yeah, basically civvies with guns. Now, if you remember, back in the day, one of the reasons the Ku Klux Klan was able to get away with so many lynchings down in the South, murder is illegal, is because they got along so well with law enforcement. You know, those who work forces, burn crosses. It's actually a really, really, really effective strategy because the police officers turned a blind eye, or they actively collaborate with the militia. Ku Klux Klan. They would have called, if the Ku Klux Klan was active today, but it had a different name. It was doing the same shit, like it was lynching black people. They'd call it a militia too. You know, they would. I'm so conditioned by the language we use in the media these days to describe all these people. A Patriot Prayer, militia. You know, Kyle Rittenhouse, militia. You know, Proud Boys, militia. These domestic terrorists. Get them out of here. It sets in, you know, and now you start to think like, oh well, they're not domestic terrorists who are taking the streets only to inflict violence and instill terror in their political opponents. You know, they're actually just venerating the Second Amendment. You know, they're just a well-armed militia, you know, defending their property. Don't adopt the enemy's narrative. I'm saying this to myself. You're just listening to me saying it to myself. We are now at a point where if you defend yourself at a protest in a way which leads to the death of somebody who was threatening your life, you might have to legitimately consider fleeing the country, because much in the same way that a black man 100 years ago defending himself against a white man would have had to flee the country to avoid, or I guess take a different name. You know, investigative services weren't quite as good back then because they knew the police were coming after them. Now, if you defend yourself against some piece of shit trying to kill you, some Proud Boy trying to shoot you, you get him first. Now you got to wonder every day of your life, are they going to deputize a bunch of fucking white nationalists to gun me down in front of my house? Are they going to kill me without even announcing themselves? Are they going to kill my family too? Think they're going to wait before opening fire to make sure other people are on the line of fire? Probably not. We face the greatest conceivable threat to our well-being imaginable right now as activists and left-leaning people. And I have to take the bite. There are unironically leftists, looking at you, Bad Faith Pod, who sincerely believe we would have an equal or better time advocating for leftism under a second Trump term. Fucking kill me. Absolutely just fucking end my life. Just take the bullet from the bottom of my jaw, up through the brain, end it in an instant. Are you fucking kidding me? There are actually people who believe in this environment that, oh yeah, dude, another term. Well, well, it's Trump and Biden. I mean, they're both pretty right wing compared to me. So, yeah, there are two types of people. Okay, there are Che Guevaras and non-Che Guevaras. Okay, and if you're non-Che Guevara, you're just the same as another non-Che Guevara. And my buddy Biden ain't a Che Guevara. Okay, there you go. All right, see, it's simple as that. Why even bother? It's not I'm not doing, it's not a whole burn your bus segment, but I don't know what I don't know what we need to do when the president is bragging about deputized civvies putting out hits on people who exercise self-defense at protests, and this is an environment where there's some sort of middle ground to be found, some neutrality, some sort of, you know, like a both sides kind of take an enlightened centrist perspective on this issue. Fuck off with that. We are on the precipice right now. And you know what? Oh, okay. A lot of negativity from me. Let's bring it back, okay? Let's go look at 538.